So welcome to Progressive Dane's general membership meeting on public safety and the jail. My name is Diane Farcetta, and I'm on the Pro Dane steering committee and also the policy committee. And we have four wonderful panelists who are kindly extending their work days to join us and to help inform this discussion. So so I want to welcome Anthony Cooper, who's Vice President of Strategic Partnership and Recovery Services, among other titles and other roles with Nehemiah. Also want to welcome Karen Reese, who's Vice President of Research and Education with Nehemiah. Danny Rishal, who is the Executive Director of Chrysalis, and Heidi Wegleitner, who is fabulous Pro Dane endorsed county board supervisor for District 2, as well as a housing rights attorney. So welcome, and again, thank you all. And I want to start maybe first with a go around that was obviously like a really surface level introduction of you for like very intelligent, engaged people and your roles in the community. So I want to give you each a moment to share anything additional that you feel like is especially, relevant to this discussion of what is public safety and about the Dane County Jail. So maybe let's just start in that same order and see, Anthony, if there's anything you want to add.
I actually, and as many people who may know me that's on here, I don't say, "Oh, ladies first." Go ahead. I think, but I guess as far as one of the things to add, I think one is that for us making sure that we're able to have these conversations, and also making sure these conversations really lead to effective action, right? Whether if you're being involved with organizations like ours at Nehemiah, Focus Interruption, or other organizations, that who really want to see the shift that we all know needs to happen. I think that's probably the main thing that I want to add, and hopefully I would like to encourage everyone to making sure that we're talking as though we are community, not just acting like it when we see each other, to really be in this space where we can really have some real open dialogues and being able to navigate things the right way. Sorry, it's been a long day, so if you hear me stutter, people who know me well know that I do stutter. So I promise you I'm not going crazy or anything, but I do stutter from time to time. So just to let everyone know that. But yeah, that's it.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll just go in the same order. So Karen, if there's anything that you'd like to add to that introduction, and I'll welcome people keep joining us, which is fabulous. And if anyone who's not on the panel, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to go ahead and do that. And then also if there's any particular questions or concerns you want to make sure are raised, this will be an interactive discussion, but also feel free to highlight those in the chat. And so Karen, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces here. Good to see you all. One of my focuses at Nehemiah is really to help educate people on how the criminal justice system works. Most people in the general public have no idea other than what they see on TV, and we can't, expect much different kinds of results at the polls if people don't understand the issues that they're voting on. So that's really important to me. I do a workshop series at least once a year about just kind of an overview. That usually happens in the fall. And then I also teach a class called Intersection of Healthcare and Incarceration with the UW. So just trying to connect physical health and what, a lot of our healthcare providers will be seeing people with incarceration experience, or hopefully we can get some good providers into our institutions as well. So
excellent. And also good to know in my role at the School of Nursing. And Danny, would you like to add anything to your introduction?
Yeah, so my name is Danny Rishal. As I mentioned, I'm the executive director at Chrysalis, and I'm happy to be here with y'all. So Chrysalis is a local nonprofit that provides mental health and substance use support with the lens of employment and peer support. So it's great to be here because I think oftentimes we're kind of like in the outskirts of these conversations, and yet there's a lot of overlap in the mental health world with the criminal justice system. And I'm also a member of the executive committee of the Recovery Coalition of Dane County, which is a group of providers and stakeholders looking to kind of improve mental health and substance use care in Dane County. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. And Heidi, is there anything that you would like to add up front about the many hats that you wear in our community?
Sure. So I come to policymaking and local politics through a lens as a legal aid lawyer, and seeing how low-income folks and how disproportionately people of color are ensnared by our criminal punishment system is really something that has disturbed me on such a deep level, particularly in the last 16 years that I've been doing that work. And my union, I'm also a union member, part of the National Organization of Legal Services Workers. And folks within our union have started to, I guess better late than never, but particularly following the murder of George Floyd at our National Joint Conference, really put an emphasis on using our voices as a union to also speak out in different arenas, including political and electoral arenas around barriers to reform and accountability and transparency. And so I just want to bring that piece too. I just came from a union thing, so it's on my mind, but I think there's a lot of coalition building that needs to occur, and conversations like this that lead to action, as Anthony said. So anyway, looking forward to the talk tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And I will moderate the discussion, but we, of course, welcome, I'm taking note of a couple of questions or points that were brought up in the chat, and you are all welcome to either keep on providing those questions and comments in the chat, or raise your hand either physically or via the magic of Zoom, and we will welcome your contributions to the discussion. But I want to start with a little bit of framing. So our intention of Progressive Dane in holding this GMM, this discussion tonight, is that we really wanted to, with the context of the Dane County Board, right, sort of debating about how many tens of millions of dollars to put to just physical construction of jails. We wanted to sort of broaden that discussion and to say, public safety is obviously a much broader discussion. And what we really need to do, in our opinion, is to invest in alternatives in the community that keep people safe and housed and healthy, and all of the things that that help people be a part of the life that they want to lead and be a part of the community that they want to be a part of. But so I guess I just wanted to make sure in the beginning that people do know, although we will be focusing on those kind of alternatives, that the Dane County Board will be delayed voting on this resolution to add another 24 million to the 150 million that have already been earmarked for building new jail facilities. So that question will come back to the board on their March 3rd meeting. And so this is, as Anthony said right from the beginning, let's also make sure that we take action on this, right? And so before March 3rd, early and often, contact your county board supervisor. And I want to give Heidi a minute here to provide additional context on that vote that will be coming up on March 3rd.
Sure. So there's been a lot of moving parts with the jail project and big cost overruns related to COVID-19, but also an examination of some of the the changes in the jail population that we saw during the pandemic, when cops were ticketing folks instead of arresting them and bringing them to jail. And when DOC wasn't just placing holds and having people locked up, pending their investigation on supervision violations and things like that. That had a dramatic impact. But and then, we also saw the crisis triage center get funded finally, and it's going forward, which is super duper exciting. And the city, launching the CARES, non-law enforcement crisis response, some additional money towards a public health approach to gun violence. So we're seeing these things happen, but the jail project has never been reevaluated. The numbers have never been reevaluated. And so the combination of this is over budget and maybe we need to rethink this has got us in a situation where there's sort of different groups on the county board with different ideas about what should happen next. And there's drawings that are about 60% done, and they're saying that we need $24.5 million more dollars in the budget. One of the questions is that accurate when your drawings are only 60% done, or will you need more money? So this budget amendment that's before us was shot down in the budget process in the fall, and then has been revived. Now they need 3/4 of a vote to pass that because it authorizes capital borrowing, bonding for the construction. So that's a lot of votes of the entire board that they need, and they did not have that last week when we voted. So the proponents of the proposal wanted more time. My colleague Supervisor Chavla kind of called it out, saying this is just to strong arm people and trying to get the votes that you're not going to get. So and then there's also talk of a more scaled down version that's been suggested by the county board chair and supported by some, just to replace the buildings in the city county buildings. So I think there's sort of a broad consensus that the 6th and 7th floor are not a good place for anyone to be. Jail's not a good place for anyone to be, but those conditions need to be addressed. And so I think where there's basically unanimous opinion is that, yes, we need to shut those down, get people out of there. Kind of the big question is how? What approach do we take? And so this one different option would be within the $150 million already allocated is to go back to Mead and Hunt and ask for a new plan that's basically a 4-story building that just replaces the beds that are currently on the 6th and 7th floor of the city county building. But nobody's introduced that yet. We haven't seen that plan. And there are folks like me that would find it really hard, because that's still going to cost a bunch of money, to support that without really seeing some major investments in the alternatives and some benchmarks about driving down our jail population. Because if we just replace those beds, we haven't reduced our beds any. We actually maintain basically the same number of beds. And anyway, so that's kind of where we're at in this process, which creates a lot of opportunity for the public and advocates to inform the process and push for solutions that we think will work. And so you're hearing things floated like, well, this should go to referendum. County Executive Parisi has suggested that the voters decide whether or not to put more money into the budget. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see if a new proposal emerges between now, well, basically in the next week, and if that will impact the vote. Otherwise, we're basically looking at the same thing with a moderate amendment, a substitute amendment that talks about kind of evaluating the jail population while we build the new South Tower jail consolidation project. I think that actually closes the door on reform in a way that a different plan wouldn't, because you're already doing the thing. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, Diane, but
Yeah, thank you. And just to reiterate, and we'll come back to that at the end too. But yeah, that's coming up on the next board meeting, which is March 3rd, and that current adding the 24.5 million is resolution 320, and the substitute is also under that. But I want to really turn and as I said before, spend time really highlighting the positive alternatives. And so I want to give space for all of our 4 panelists to talk about, in your work, in your experience, what if you had a magic wand, right? Like, what is the program that either like desperately needs to be brought to Dane County or is already here and needs to be expanded, right? Because part of the problem is that these community programs always have to fight for crumbs, whereas it's like, how many dozens of billions of dollars can we shovel into incarceration, right? So yeah, whoever wants to go first on that. And this is where it's hard to make eye contact on Zoom. Anthony, would you like to?
No, I guess I will.
Thank you.
So I mean, it's so many. Oh wow, it's just so much to kind of unpack there, right? So I was a part of the committee when they were talking about, as far as talking about having the addition on, and that was one of the main things that I talked about, as far as really saying, okay, look, so we know it's supposed to be less beds and things of that nature. So what type of training is happening? And I'm sorry, I shouldn't even say training, but treatment is happening inside while someone is being incarcerated. But then also what is happening outside while they're still connected. That means connected to Department of Corrections, connected to county, connected to at some point being able, they will have to go to court and things of that nature. How much of that work can actually be done on the outside? So just to kind of talk about one of our programs that what we have at Nehemiah is called Man Up, right? You're being able to give people, we're utilizing someone who working with people who we have the lived experience, but then also being able to show people that, hey, look, you can come from where you're at right now and do something different with your life if you so choose so, and being able to help navigate what that looks like, right? And continue to model that, but not only model it, but then also, because I think one of the problems is that where, even though we can add different types of, as many of you may want to call it treatment, a lot of times I just say this is I like to even call it at times a check on someone's life, right? So of being able to get people to think differently, they need to be able to see it on a regular basis. They need to be able to not only see it, but then also when they are having their hiccups, whatever that may be, to be able to have a person or persons to be able to talk to be able to navigate with, like, man, if you have been stuck here, what did you do? Or if there are, other challenges, or how do I get reunited with my family, and and things of that nature, because people are broken. Not even adding the COVID piece to it, and right. So it's all of this other additional stuff that is so much work that has to be done when people are coming out of incarceration. No one is talking, no one is having the broader conversation about that. Something that I share quite often is that reentry does not start 6 months when a person comes home, or a month when a person comes home. It starts day of incarceration. So the more that we plan and make those positive connections on day of incarceration, that's when we are not going to sit back and we have no need to be able to build an additional jail at that point. But we have to be able to have, like, organizations like ours and others. We need that additional support to be able to make those things happen, because all of those things cannot just lie just in one person or one organization's hands, right? So it takes all of us to continue to build and transform not only the way how we do quote unquote business, but then also that how we are impacting people's lives and giving people that choice and that option. So it falls on both of us because it's a partnership from day one. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I could just comment a little bit on some of the things that Heidi laid out. I'm glad to hear that there is at least conversation of some scaled down versions. It's really troubling to hear that Mead and Hunt might still be in the picture. So one of the things that is frustrating for me about this conversation is the amount of money we've paid to Mead and Hunt to not deliver on alternative designs. We got the first report from them. I can't remember the exact year, but the statistics in the report were being refuted by the sheriff. So that should have given us a heads up that there was something wrong there. The second report, many people fought really hard to get community input into the process. The county paid people to run work groups that involved several community leaders who put together some very thoughtful plans. Mead and Hunt was supposed to, it was in the resolution, include what the community came up with. And basically they gave them a nod in the introduction page and that was it. And there was no consideration of alternatives there. So to go down that road again would be futile because we already know what they're going to give us. And it's not reflecting any of the conversations that we've had about alternatives or even though there is a medical unit in the design, really the conversation about, better healthcare, mental health care, and moving people into community settings, it's just not there in the plan. So if we want something that's effective, we got to go down a different road. The other part of that is at Nehemiah, one of the things that we've done is kind of pulled together about 30 years of studies that have been done by the city, county, and the state. And we haven't fully released that yet, although it could be. And it's basically, we had volunteers who went through, took all the recommendations and looked to see where all the repetition was across all those reports. So we study the same thing, we come up with the same recommendations, and then we just study it again, and we don't actually do anything. We also paid a lot of money to, I always forget the acronym, it's ILPP, but they did a very comprehensive overview of our criminal justice system in 2006 with a follow-up in 2011 with a lot of similar recommendations. So we've paid a lot of money to get people to tell us what's the right thing to do here. And it's really frustrating to see that we're disregarding all of that knowledge and all of those tax dollars to do something that's not in alignment with those things. Then the last thing I'll say is there's also a little bit of money that came through looking forward to a community justice center, which would be a really great thing to move forward in our community and invest in, which is essentially the idea of having more community-based services, kind of reinventing the way our courtrooms look and how we operate, and completely redesigning the way we look at drug courts and other things like that. So,
and I'll add one thing to that. And I think I have to say this, is that I think that becomes the problem also even with the community, right? The community is frustrated because of the simple fact, and to Karen's point all the way through, it's business as usual, right? So how many, I'll even, same point when we talk about Allied Drive, Food Desert, we hired an agency to come in, we paid them $300,000 to $400,000 to come in, or don't quote me on the numbers, to come in to let us know that a grocery store needs to be in that area. And we know that there's no grocery store within the next 5 to 10 miles, right? And there's a lot, I don't want to start saying how many numbers of people who live in that area, but we know that that's a problem. It becomes business as usual. And over the years, we continue to see that in so many different ways, from Dane County Jail to what treatment programs should be going on, what shouldn't be going on. It becomes this kind of like endless cycle, and people are seeing that. So thank you.
Yeah, Thank you. A lot to dig into there. Danny, would you like to?
Yeah, I can jump in, just kind of, hearing a lot of what we're looking into, what surveys and studies have been out, and then like the lack of kind of follow through. I think we know a lot about what community needs around social determinants of health and housing and connection and employment. Like those things aren't new, and yet like funds aren't going there. So I guess when you're talking about like what ideally do we need, and if we're putting money into making living condition, or not living conditions, but conditions in a jail safer, I see a need for that. And if we're talking about additional funds, I think we need to be talking about funding these programs that do exist, or looking at innovative ways to provide services to people and meet folks' needs so that people can thrive in the community. And I just want to point out a couple of things. I know Heidi mentioned some new initiatives that are coming, that have started. We're talking about CARES, so that mobile crisis. We're talking about the triage center that potentially or hopefully will come at some point. I want to throw in the behavioral health resource center that is relatively new in the community too. And all of these, or at least in the first two, we had talked about lived experience. We talked about peer support being part of those, and that has not happened. And I do know that behavioral health resource center, I think they're closer there. I don't know where things are with CARES. But again, and I think Anthony mentioned, like we pull people in, we ask people's opinion, and yet a lot of times there's not follow through. And then I think that can be really disheartening for folks who have given a lot, especially people who have been really affected by a lot of these systems and really traumatized, and that to ask for feedback in creating, things that will actually support them, and being available and accessible and equitable, and then just to not see that happen, it can just kind of further traumatize a person. So I think like we have a long way to go to authentically listen and lift up and center lived experience. And we have opportunities. We have people who have so much knowledge to share. I was just telling, Anthony before that Chrysalis, we're working with EDO, Each One Teach One, with Tara Wilhelmy, who just started a behavioral health crisis focused lived experience council, or at least a group of people who are starting to talk about their own experiences and gain confidence and skills to then help kind of inform decisions. And I just don't see enough of that right now, but I see that being an opportunity and an in making some change.
Yeah, thank you. And I also, Tyson, I want to acknowledge that you had your hand up, and I want to let the sort of panelists talk, and then we'll come to your question. But I want to do a really quick follow-up question, Danny, if I might, and that's, because there are these larger, like crisis triage center, hopefully becoming larger with CARES, and also the behavioral health resource center, that are relatively new, that we don't really, like, they can be improved, as you were just talking about, but my guess is that we don't really know the impact, right, of what this will have. Any idea on, when we will know better, or, it just seems like there are so many moving parts, right, into figuring out how do we have real health and public safety.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they are relative, especially, both of them are very new. I know the Behavioral Health Resource Center is doing a lot to try to track and gather data about gaps. And again, like what was stated, a lot of the things we do know, but it is sometimes useful information, because I think when you have underfunded systems or programs, you also don't always have that information, or the data isn't really quickly accessible. So I do appreciate, I think that the Behavioral Health Resource Center will be able to offer some more clarity on gaps and connect dots for folks who maybe haven't seen those yet. And I do think like CARES and community alternatives are a great step, and they're just such a small piece. I think sometimes these new initiatives, folks put so much behind them, like being the answer, and yet like the funding for them is so small, and then they're almost setting them up for failure. So folks can say, look, we funded this and it hasn't made a difference. And then but really what's being funded is like such a small piece of what's really needed to make change.
Thank you. Great points.
I actually want to give her a high five from a Zoom high five, because and that's one of the, again, one of the it becomes just another big challenge in our community because of simple factors like, all right, hey, let me give you breadcrumbs and I need you to fix the world. Right? And that just is not going to work at all, right? I need you to bring more people in and to be able to assist, but at the same time, and that's why for many of our community folks that really want or have or are doing and have made some impact in our community, they do one or two things: leave, and I even hate to say this, die, or say, okay, look, I just give up, or three, or I just give up, right? Because of it becomes it's like you're working a system within another system and trying to have creative output. You're trying to have output that is to be able to change and help motivate people, and being able to also transform the systems to be able to help them understand, like, no, you've been doing this wrong. And then also we've seen other it's not just Wisconsin that, you know, has had a care center or whatever. Let's use the data from others to be able to make things work. I mean, and I hate to, I feel like when I say it and I say it out loud, because I've said it numerous times, I feel like it's like, okay, how come you don't get this? All right, you know, and that's and if we keep getting stuck, like us doing violence prevention and intervention, right? That's not anything new, right? It's new to Madison, right? On the way how we do things, but at the same time, it's not new. But in order for us to do it effectively, we talk with and train under national organizations that are already doing the work. So that's what helps us to be able to have the outcome that we have. The same thing with reentry and so on and so forth. So you have to be able to do that. So it becomes very frustrating when our systems don't get that. When you build a building, when you build a prison, I'm sorry, a county jail, right, on top of the jail that we already have, there's a system that goes along there. It's not like one person just came up all of a sudden and said, hey, let's go ahead and just build on top of it. Let's make everything great. It just doesn't work that way, right? You know, at some point someone had to talk to someone else and say, hey, this may be a possibility. Let's start looking outside the box. And I think for some odd reason, we just haven't got that. We haven't got to that point in our city and our county. And yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you. And Heidi, you're again, it's a big question, but if there's an alternative that either you feel like, you know, really we need to bring it here, or we need to the point that many folks have very, you know, passionately made, you know, needs to get more than breadcrumbs, right, to do the job that needs to be done in Dane County. What would you highlight?
Well, I just totally agree with everything that's been said, and really appreciate Karen mentioning how Mead and Hunt did not incorporate those things into their report. I think that we first got in 2014. Well, their subsequent report following Res 556 that did not include anything. But I just want to just add that before I forget, it's important because there's so many new supervisors and people don't have that institutional memory. I mean, I think for the reason Danny said, it's like, it's hard to get people to like show up when they feel like they haven't been listened to, and they've been there, they've given their input and their feedback, and then it kind of feels like, you know, they just went through the motions and it didn't have an impact. So it's really important for those of us who are there and can be there to remind people about that, how that was supposed to happen. And that's why this consultant is not the right one for us. So thank you. I work a lot on housing stuff, and you know, housing is obviously so fundamental. It's a human right. And we know so many folks that have, you know, involvement with our criminal justice system struggle with housing insecurity. And once you're in, and you have that, you know, record on CCAP or what, you know, whatever happens, like, or even once you become homeless, you're more likely to become homeless again too. So it's like, these things are so connected. And also, you know, that the healthcare piece, that, you know, I'm not trying to say the solutions are easy, but they're simple in a way, right? Like, we need capacity in our community. We need the sort of funds that are going to retain and attract staff to these supportive service providers, because we can build housing, but we need those supportive services so folks can be stable in that housing. And we need kind of the community control aspect of that housing, because if we're relying on for-profit developers and landlords to house folks that have serious and persistent mental health issues or addiction issues, or, you know, have experienced just a tremendous amount of trauma, that it doesn't work super well. We really need that kind of hook, that commitment, that leverage over the housing provider and the supportive services that are truly well trained and understanding. And I really appreciate that peer support piece too. But we kind of know this, and again, like, we've talked about this, and I do think that we can have better closer connections between our homeless services providers and the folks working on some of these data-driven justice sort of solutions, when we're looking at kind of intercepting the cycle of incarceration and looking at the number of folks that are incarcerated frequently. I mean, I don't think these folks are sitting at the same table coming up with solutions together. And that's what I think really needs to happen. But we have to kind of have the will and you know, the leadership and vision to really push back against sort of the institutional status quo that keeps us where we're at. So I really think housing is so critical, and that's why when I was working on sort of an alternative, it included a big piece, a big commitment towards planning for permanent supportive housing in the community.
Awesome. Thank you all. Tyson. Yeah, great intro and a lot to dig into. And Tyson, I want to give you a chance to ask the question you had, or ask a new question that's on top of mind, and other folks as well, of course, but Tyson's been waiting for a while.
All good. Thanks, Diane. Sorry, I'm going to ask a question even though I got late into the meeting, so I apologize if maybe this was addressed. So it's going to be a little long-winded at first. I really appreciate everyone's conversation here that I've heard. Again, I got them late though, but I apologize. Especially just the things I heard about, you know, the work that y'all are doing and the insight that y'all have on these issues. It's really nice to hear, quite frankly, common sense from people who will actually understand what's going on the ground of the most impacted being centered instead of the other way around. So it's very refreshing. So I just want to thank you all for being here first and foremost. For me as a community member and a person that's grown up here in Madison, Wisconsin and Dane County as a biracial gay kid, you know, that quite frankly was very lucky, but also as firsthand witness to a lot of the cycles that we're talking about, and the cycles that people get stuck in. The first thing that I think of is kind of two different issues that we're focusing on here. And one is, how do we stop immediate harm? And then how do we stop, you know, perpetuating harm with the institutions and the systems that we currently have? And how that relates specifically to this jail, I kind of want to ask a question about, and where I struggle, right? My position currently on the jail is that it is inhumane as it stands. However, our carceral system is still inhumane, period, full stop. And also, there is no way in hell we should be having the largest public works project in the county being a brand new shiny jail. I don't care how much service services you have in it, that's insane. That's insane, period, full stop. And so we can't continue to do harm by doing things and addressing these things, in my mind, that's still investing in the very systems and structure that make this harm possible and that perpetuate this harm. And that's kind of where we're at this juncture. And I think the reality in my head is, and please chime in if you think otherwise, I'm just kind of spewing from my mind here, just based on all the conversation that I heard. So is that we got to build something, it's going to happen. And how can we reduce harm in the process? And I think we know that answer. And I think we know that answer, and it's been talked about for a couple of years. Well, it's been talked about for more than a couple of years, but let's just talk about the last couple of years that we've been dealing with this. Resolution 145 came up and talked about a lot of the things that you guys are talking about. And I know that you guys were a part of those conversations, which is really focusing on how our systems impact the most impacted of these issues. And we have some of the worst disparities in the country, especially when it comes to incarceration, where over 50% of folks are Black or folks of color, Black and brown folks in our jail. And there's now an understanding after 2020, at least on the surface, and purely on the surface, we all agree that these things need to be addressed. How that is the real question. And we have to really think about how we make demands, I feel like, and strategize and coordinate ourselves while still not getting burnt out, and how we address what's in front of us immediately, but then also not perpetuating those long-term issues. And so currently what's going on that I'm aware of is what Supervisor Leitner just mentioned, is a resolution that was voted down, or sorry, postponed from the last meeting to add $25 million to the jail. And from that conversation, I see a lot of people that are really frustrated. And I also see people talking about willingness to listen. What I want to know from your guys' perspective is, in this kind of short-term issue that's coming up really shortly, from your guys' perspective, how you think that should be dealt with. My first thought is to ask and propose incorporating the things that we're talking about, of criminal justice reform, of collaboration between different entities and government structures to make sure that happens, an accountability structure and specific metrics and numbers asked to make that happen, or finding out how to make that happen. Something. And yeah, and Heidi's like, this is almost 10 years old. Yeah, it's really old. We've been talking about this forever. And so we can't continue to just accept that we've been talking about this forever. I think we have real opportunity here. Like Heidi said, and like you have said, there's a lot of new leadership coming in. And there's prime opportunity to really make the changes. And I think sometimes in good faith, from folks that we haven't had before. And I guess my ultimate question, very long-windedly, is how do we take advantage of this opportunity that we currently have before us, and make these things happen on a policy level and on the county level, and ensure that we are not building a jail that we know we're going to fill if we do build it, and that we're factoring in criminal justice reform and incarcerating less people, because we know how harmful that is to our communities, and ensuring that we can make sure that happens, because this project is going to be 70 years. It's going to not just be, it's going to be there. The jail will be there and it won't go away. It's not going to get demolished, right? And we know from our systems, we will fill it. We will. So this is a really important moment. How can we work together to make that happen from your guys' perspectives?
That's a great question. And it, even in what you just said, Tyson, the public safety building wasn't designed to be just a regular jail space. It was designed to be more of a work release space. And we filled it. And actually, we don't have enough work release space to give everyone that opportunity where court has decided they should have it. So that's important to remember, to your point. I think one of the biggest things we need to get some traction on these things is really pushing forward the general public's education on the issues and how deep into, like, outside of the people we see at meetings regularly, how deep into the county can we get these messages and help people understand what's really going on. One thing that we hear from our electeds very often from the platform is, number one, I have to think about victims, which is kind of not really a valid point, because a lot of people who are in the jail are also victims of crime. And so you have to ask which victims, and given the racial disparities in the programming that we have, it's very clear which victims are. Our electronic monitoring program has had horrible racial disparities since it was born. So the other thing that they'll say is that we have to worry about public safety. And that was kind of a question that you raised, Diane, at the beginning. What does that even mean? And then the third thing that people are worried about is, well, what's being voted on right now in our state legislature, where one bad thing, horrible thing happens. I want to understate that, with the Waukesha parade. And now we're jumping to tightening our restrictions, when in fact we don't hear about the thousands of people who are released, on bail, on their own recognizance, on signature bonds, or people who get out on certain programs who are just fine and working a job and taking care of their family. We don't hear those stories. So it's hard to expect a general public that doesn't understand the system to understand why we don't need to build a new jail, why we need to invest in these alternatives. So I think that is something that that we overlook sometimes.
And I would,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add real quick. I think like kind of to go off what you were saying, Karen, I think sometimes there's still this focus on like punishment for a lot of these things, as opposed to creating communities of care. And there's so much stigma that exists for so many of the things that people end up in jail for. I mean, you're talking about addiction and mental illness and homelessness and racism and all these different issues that, we come at it from this angle of like, we need to put people away, or we need to fix people, and this is how, and that's just not the way to do it. And I think there are ways that we've talked about earlier where it's really kind of bringing people in as opposed to bringing them out, and making sure basic needs are met. And all these, like I mentioned, the social determinants of health, and those things are accessible, but yet I think there's still this stigma, the fear, this like idea of what actually folks need to be rehabilitated or whatnot, that there's a lot of disconnect within.
And Anthony?
No, well, both of my partners on this line, I just feel like definitely they hit it right on the head. And I think sometimes even for our electeds, not that I feel like they understand the system, but they're not always tied to some of the challenges that are also going on in the community. So that becomes that's another layer of disconnect. And because of the different layers of disconnect that they may have, even though they may hear from others in their zone, in their neighborhoods, but if we're not bringing resources to those neighborhoods, and if they're not allowing other resources to actually happen, or being able, to me, as most folks know, I'm a door knocker. I'm a person who will go and knock on a door if there's some challenges there, and we know about them, and being able to make that first contact and say, hey man, how are things going, right? And meeting people where they're at. But that's the same thing. We have to do that same thing with our electeds, to be able to meet them where they're at, and then being able to pull them in. One of the things before everyone else got on this call, I was, or actually it was even after, when everyone started to come in, I was saying, I hope this is a space that we can not only talk as community, but then also being able to work together as community. Because now we're able to look at the bigger picture. And for people to ask questions. And Tyson, I love everything that what you said, but something I do want to make sure that I say to you, Mr. Tyson, is the fact that when it comes to especially the institution, is doing what it's supposed to do, what it has always done. Right, when we're talking about, especially when we're talking about incarceration, so we have to continue to have, and we have to continue to have the conversation of saying, hey, this needs to change, and we need it to change now, not later, because again, I believe Heidi has said it. Some of these conversations that we're having right now, we've had for 10, 20 years, I feel. Right. I've even gotten to the point in some meetings when everyone is saying, hey, well, everyone's working in silos. We're talking about nonprofits. That's the same conversation. And everyone's working in silos in city and county government at the same time, right? So so how can we keep having, now we've had that conversation at least 15 years ago that I know for a fact that I've been involved in. So how can we actually do something about it now and change it, right? So yeah, because it just becomes a bigger challenge later on down the road, and everyone sees it, especially with our new elects that are in.
Awesome, thank you. And Heidi, I don't know if you want to highlight. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm just putting
That's
stuff
all
in the
right.
chat in case anyone wants to copy stuff later and look. Yeah, I was watching a movie about or a 10-minute sort of short film on pathways to housing out in Washington, D.C., which is kind of like the first real housing first kind of project, and started, I think, in the 80s or decades ago. But it's where kind of all the other housing first came from. And it's a really great film, and I'll find it and try to share with it at some point. But I reached out to the board member who sent it on a housing listserv I was at, and it was just like, oh, thank you so much for sharing this. I really needed this right now, this bit of inspiration, and I look forward to sharing it as we continue to advocate for permanent supportive housing in Dane County. And he was like, or Madison or something, I said, and he said, well, didn't assertive community treatment start in Dane County? Which is this model of this kind of, progressive engagement, but really person-centered, right? And in terms of their recovery, and then just providing all that support around the person. And so, in the early 80s, Dane County was an international leader and innovator in these incredibly important type of human services work and behavioral health care. And yet we still we're not investing in it. And I'm just wondering if Danny or Karen or Anthony can speak to those programs that were invented by County Human Services now, like, where do they stand? Because the folks I know who need them aren't in, some people are getting served, but are they, and I meant to reach out to staff, and there's just so many things to do and so many questions, but it seems to me like here we have this reputation, right? And so I think he was kind of flabbergasted that I was asking him about, kind of a thing. And so it just feels like that's one example of, something that worked. Maybe it's not shiny since it's been around a couple decades, but it, I think you can't get in. I mean, I think basically we have caps on the service, and for some reason, people, the staff don't say, and human services don't say, wow, we could really use some more funding here to grow this program, and that could help us here in this other area and align with our values. And that's super frustrating, and it makes it really hard to realign things in our budget, because if you're familiar with the county budget process, you have different departments that go through different oversight committees, and each goes through their own silo, separate path until you get into the budget committee, and then things all just get hacked down and no changes ever made, and everybody's trying to please everybody. So anyway, I just wanted to share that story because it really struck me as like, geez, like we know we developed this. Why are we here right now?
I want to say thank you so much, and you get a high five as well, because it's crazy. There were programs that I'm not sure how many people remember the Somerset when it had Somerset. It was called Somerset. It's called Parker Place now, but there were programs that were going on. There was a gentleman named by the name of Cephas Childs. He developed a program where he was working with people that were in that community to do. It was like kind of like drug and alcohol training. There's another name for it. I'm just drawing a blank right now. It's a little late, so please forgive me. But and again, he was also one of the people when I said why people leave Madison, right? Because of that constant fight of trying to, when you see something that works, he was one of the people that were a part that actually developed some different programming that was something that can work throughout our whole city. But because of whatever, for some reason, it had to stop. We see that happen more and more throughout in Madison City and County, right. So we see that happen so much. I feel like that it seems like it's some type of setup, right? It becomes, and maybe this may sound a little crazy. Feel free, call me crazy. It's all right. I've been called worse. So because it seems like, all right, there is some type of cap in what can actually be given or what can actually, whether if the funds are there or being able to help people to develop a way to be able to get the funds from other places. And those things are not happening. And I don't know what's the why behind it, but that has been a struggle for Madison for far too long.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that, something that started in the 80s was, and I'm just speculating, but it's going to get turned on its head throughout the 90s and the truth and sentencing conversations and the tough on crime conversations, when we saw money get funneled, programs like that get defunded in favor of criminal legal system funds. Sandy just put in the chat a comment about ACT through the state and gets exhausted by the most severe needs and not preventative services. That's something, even the Department of Corrections has their ORS program that focuses on people with severe disabilities, and the funding is just minuscule. And I don't know what the answer is, except that, overcoming those tough on crime narratives, we're still suffering from those. And so the conversation about, Housing First speaks for itself in all of the models, even where there's crisis centers and triage centers. The key to lowering the jail populations in those places is the housing. That's what helps people stay stable. And you can imagine, I cannot imagine what it would be like to not know where I'm going to sleep. And just the amount of stress that comes along with that. And most people don't understand what our shelters are like either. So I'm just coming back to that understanding piece, helping people really relate and getting away from that tough on crime.
Yeah. And I will just add, so Heidi, I'm really glad you brought up Pathways, because I was saying before the conversation started, I moved here from DC and worked at Pathways to Housing for 5 years. And I think it's an incredible model. And you're right, it's not, something that was created in the last 5 years. And yet I think it's still like proven and is so effective. And I remember people being shocked about the whole idea that ACT was created here and yet is not a robust part of our system. And I still don't understand it. I ask questions in all meetings, and it does come back to funding. And we have community support programs, which are seen as ACT light, and yet don't encompass some key elements of ACT that make it so successful when we're talking about peer support and having specialists in housing and having enough wraparound care and shared, workload and to help with the staff roles. And I think you see the turnover so quickly. And I just think it's interesting. So I moved back here 10 years ago, and I remember someone from Pathways came to Madison to talk about Housing First. And I met with them afterwards. And she's pretty much said, like, this community does not seem ready for Housing First. And I think a lot of that came from probably what we see in other maybe like progressive conversations that, part of Housing First is harm reduction. So this idea that, like, a person doesn't need to be on psychiatric medication or off of drugs or meeting all these check boxes to get their needs met. And yet I think in a lot of our systems and our conversations, people might say that, and yet like there is totally that list of like, you need to get this, you need to do this, and if you don't do this, you don't get this, and that's not the model. So that was just very interesting. And again, that was a decade ago, and I try to be like a hopeful person, and I really believe like that we can get there, and like hopefully these conversations can continue, and education to the community can continue to change that narrative and the way we work alongside people and provide services. But I think there's definitely like some disconnect there still.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to quick highlight some things in the chat. So Laura had asked about positive models where people have done a better job of investing in community services. And Heidi pointed out that JFA has helped other communities do that, but that's not what Dane County asked them to do. And there was a question from Marcia earlier about asking where folks are at on the abolition side of things. So I just want to throw that in the mix. And of course, welcome other folks to ask questions. Tyson?
Yeah, I don't know if folks want to address the first questions first. Karen, I saw you unmute, so if you want to talk, I'll shut up. Talk first.
Can I make a quick point on the budget piece? I really appreciate that. It seems to be like we have a lot of consensus here that we throw a ton of money into punishment and pennies at prevention. But if you have been involved in a county budget process, you will hear how much of our budget goes to human services. And they will tell you that and say how proud and how we, Cadillac services here in Dane County. And so that is the disconnect that we need to continue to address with better information, because so much of that money is federal pass-through money anyway. It's not our local tax dollars. When you look at where our local tax dollars, the stuff that we actually have like more say and flexibility and control over, you'll see the general purpose revenue go up towards punishment. And that just does not match with what we claim to be here in Dane County. So I think it's really important to challenge that piece and continue to put this information out there, because even Progressive Dane was interviewing a candidate for endorsements a few weeks ago. And he was like, well, I think we have really, really good, strong human services, like had no clue as to how many holes there are and how many wonderful programs are so woefully underfunded. So I'm glad that we have this. We have to teach, help other people learn more about that gap.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, the other big piece, kind of going back to one of your earlier questions, Tyson, and Heidi's point about the 2019 amendment to include people with lived experience on the CJC, and Coop's point about a great person who ran a great program leaving, really comes down to who we respect and what voices we respect in our community and are willing to invest in. The thing is to do culturally responsive work, like Coop and his team do at Nehemiah, is doing things a different way. And I mean, Coop was talking about business as usual. If we want different, we have to do different. And the thing that comes up in most of these programs is the difference between the transactional approach and a relational approach. And our programs are very focused on relationships and trust building first. And if we don't do that, we don't have success. And that's what the staff know. The problem is when people who are trained a certain way or are used to things going a certain way for decades see what that looks like, they say it's unorganized, it's informal, it's unprofessional, and assign all these judgments to it without fully understanding how it works. Programs like the one Coop brought up and many, many others are having a lot of success on a small scale. And one of the biggest problems is that our funders, including the county, aren't asking the right questions about metrics and how are you determining what's successful and what isn't. And if you don't have that understanding or that lens of what works for people, then you're never going to see that. And so we just keep putting things. I'll give a small example. I mean, I think the county has done a great job with with Colleen Clark, getting our data together and making it accessible for people to look at. And also they coordinated for the Community Justice Center, there was $100,000 that went forth to ask the community what they thought about these things, that went to 7 organizations led by people of color in our community. And one example of this was they put together a really nice facilitator guide so that we wouldn't have to do the work in designing the program, but could just go out and ask questions. And, I was open with this with the staff, but it didn't work for the people who we were going to ask. We had to reword questions, focus group style, just even the set a meeting time and have people come to do a focus group. That's not how it works. And so our staff completed that task, but it looked very, very different than what was prescribed. And it's just, we don't have people in positions of power with enough understanding or experience to be making those decisions. And we got to trust people that know, that are telling us how it needs to work.
Awesome.
Okay, first off, yes, and yes. Oh God, I'm not going to get started rambling about it because I'll get off topic and we'll be talking forever. But Karen, let's connect. Yes. Anyway, so I just wanted to kind of circle back to the conversation, kind of a follow up to what I was asking before and your guys' answers. And what I got out of that largely is, I think, an agreement of we're investing in systems that don't work for our community and not in the ones that do. In a way that's kind of seems to me like early 2000s, like let's just get a really good consultant from DC and they'll fix our problems because metrics, buzzwords, et cetera. And I think that largely stems from incompetence or not knowing how to ask the right questions and how to identify and lead on those questions. Which goes back to something I do have to disagree with one thing with Anthony, and not like disagree, let me finish. It's basically, I agree with meeting electeds where they're at. However, looking at the last few years and a background on me, I've worked in politics for over a decade and I work in houseless services because I need a break from that stuff. I got paid a lot more, but man, this job in social services is less stressful than that. I mean, you guys know what that means. It's a lot. But, I disagree. I think we have an opportunity here and we're on the right trajectory when it comes to getting pressure to elected officials. We just need to sustain it. And I don't think we need to meet them where they're at, because what I think they have done and what I think is happening is from them. They have the power here. And I think we need to identify and talk about who has power in these systems. And right now, the budget of the jail, the budget of the sheriff, the budget and priorities of the police department, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, there's state statutes that get in the way, but largely is in control of our community, which are local and county elected officials. And we, I think, need good leadership that is going to listen to the community, going to listen to the ground, going to collect data in a way that's culturally competent and actually getting what we need, evidence-based, but also meeting the community and what our true needs are and knowing how we can meet those needs, which is obviously severely lacking in leadership. We can talk all about structure, but who has the power to change the structure? It's our elected officials, like Supervisor Lichtleitner, who is great. And one of the few elected officials that actually posts useful information on her Facebook and engages with the community. And we see what that burden looks like for electeds when we're not working and focusing on maybe what we need to focus on. And I'm not saying we as all of us individually, we all have our roles, but just as a general concept is ensuring that there's more Heidis and there's more other folks in elected leadership that listen to the community, listen to the most impacted, and therefore can meet our community's needs. We know our community is better than this. It has been in some aspects in the past, but we know our community is better than this. But is our leadership? And if they're not, maybe that's what we need to focus on. And just getting back to that is where the power lies. And maybe where we should focus to make these changes is in those, I think it's 36, I forget always how many county board supervisors there are, but I believe it's 36, let's just say, please correct me if that's wrong, and the 20 council folks, 37, thank you, 37 county board supervisors, 20 council members, and 1 mayor, right? And then 1 a county executive, you know, and when we're not talking in silos, maybe we sometimes are afraid because we've been talking about this for so long. And I'd like to hear you guys' opinion on this. Not in the public sphere or not gaining more attention because we're still talking in the same narrative, like things aren't changing, like we are losing, when we're not. If you look at these elections and how things have changed pretty quickly, I know it's cyclical, but when you look, I think we're on a good path. I can confidently say that. I think we're on a good path. I think we have real good folks that are coming into elected office, that are now paying attention, that are just normal people that care about the issues. And I'm really excited to see it. And so I just want to circle back on how do you think we can enable that aspect of making change with the issues that we're talking about?
Something I think I just want to add, and probably I love everything that what you said, Tyson. I think I may have met you once or twice before in the past, but I think it's just to kind of clarify, the whole thing is meeting them where they're at with the opportunity to be able to teach them for stuff that, and to expose people to things that they may not necessarily have heard of before, or even look at certain things as being just a concept. So that's the part where I mean, as far as meeting people where they're at, to be able to uplift and motivate, to hopefully open up their mind to other stuff, right? But I kind of feel like because there is so much work that what we have to do, and that because I feel as though it's not happening on a consistent level, that we're not only continue to having the conversation, but then also making sure that we have to reiterate what that conversation really was, and almost showing up in a sense of, I understand there's a county board meeting or a city county meeting, but also for us to also make sure that we're talking to our elects as well on a regular basis, to be able to give them more information, say, hey, look, did you know about this? And this is the way, because I know that there's community members or elects that may say, oh, okay, we understand violence prevention, also working with in the reentry population, and they may feel that they understand it, but don't necessarily understand the process of the work. Because just like I mentioned earlier, where does reentry start at? Reentry doesn't start in 6 months before someone comes home. It starts day of incarceration. How do we help someone to prevent from that same old cycle, from making sure that some of the necessary tools are in play, and also that they are connected with the community, whether it's nonprofit or other services, with the hope of being able to allow them to see there is another way. We have to do that on a regular basis. And I feel like those are just things that are not necessarily, those things are not happening enough. And there's not enough people that have the amount of staff to be able to support those things enough to be able to help as many as that we actually can. And whether if we're doing one organization or multiple organizations together, and making sure that those same information sharing and things of that nature. So it's a huge fight, and I do believe we can get there, but everyone has to really put in and be willing to be able to make those things happen. And more conversations need to be able to happen. When we talk about GVRS and excuse me, and we're trying to bring GVRS to Madison to be able to help, and with our gun violence problem that what we have, us as a team, we have the tools, but also trying to get others like from city and county boards to be able to see, hey, look, there is another way. There's another way, and why all the different stakeholders have to be able to work together in order to get over this hump. Some, they chose not to be a part of that. So that becomes another problem as well, because it all depends on who owns it. And sometimes I think that that's another fight that we get into in our city, in our county.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to reiterate, I put it in the chat, and Heidi's also putting a lot of great information in the chat. But yeah, the county board vote or the county board meeting that will include a vote on resolution 320 that would put $24.5 million more dollars towards the jail is a week from tomorrow, March 3rd. And there's a link in the chat where you can get contact information for supervisors, but also like there's not a lot of people who, at least at the last meeting, I was surprised how few members of the public spoke. You know, and it's this is the time, as Tyson was saying earlier, to really, like, this work has been going on, and we've heard some wonderful information and perspectives tonight from our panelists, including just highlighting the gems that we already have in our community, the programs that we know work, but that are starved for support, right? So I just want to give a heads up that we are going to be winding down at 8. So if you do have questions or comments, ask them now, put them in the chat, raise your hand. And with saying that, I will let Bonnie ask her question.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I was just planning to listen and learn tonight, but I do have one question, and that is, it kind of has to do with the conditions at the jail. I'm sure Anthony and maybe some others have been in there on a more regular basis, but if you've ever been on a tour of it, I think it feels pretty heartbreaking just to see the conditions that people are living in. I know the solitary confinement area, if you just hold your arms out straight out from your sides, you can touch both sides of the walls. And what people sleep on is a concrete slab, whether that's a pregnant woman in solitary confinement or someone who's been shot 5 times. It's the same concrete slab. And so my heart is just kind of broken for the conditions that the residents are in while they're in jail. And while I think these conversations about so many front end things are really important and necessary, I just wonder if anybody could speak to kind of the conditions of the jail, and if you feel okay with them where they're at, or what is a remedy for that, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bonnie. And I'll let maybe Heidi address that. I mean, you spoke to that earlier, Heidi, and I'll just maybe have you start, and then if other folks want to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is heartbreaking. One of the most heartbreaking experiences I had, though, when touring the jail actually related to a comment by our then Sheriff Mahoney directed to a woman in the city county building. And I say that because the jail has been used, the jail consolidation project has been discussed as a humanitarian thing, as a progressive thing, as the right thing to do, and to alleviate those conditions. But we need to be really careful and understand that it's not just a building, it's also about the treatment of people in that building. And And that is a culture that is instilled. And so I want to tell you, when I went on a jail tour, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe, and we were in the city county building, Sheriff Mahoney, and I've talked to him about this. I've emailed him about this. We've talked up front about it. I only regret that I didn't challenge him right at that moment. I was so shocked, but we were going into the area where people were in segregation, and there was a woman in there, and he said loudly, "Now we're in the area with the worst of the worst." And I thought it was so dehumanizing to hear our sheriff, the boss of all the staff in that building, talk intentionally loudly to a woman, and she screamed in response at him, wailed. And it was just, it shook me to my core that our sheriff talked about people as the worst of the worst. And I think we need to remember that there are people that staff the building. There are people that, for-profit companies that provide healthcare in that building. And that money also has been allocated to address health and safety issues in that building. And the sheriff stopped spending money that was allocated to that, to address those safety concerns in that building. So while it's absolutely true that, you know, people should not be in there, and those facilities are not any place that you can feel that people are being treated with respect or dignity, there's a lot more that goes into that than just creating a new shiny building. You can have a new shiny building and still be disrespected and still not get the care you need. And that is a cultural thing. So, I mean, I haven't experienced that, you know, sort of situation with the new sheriff or anything, but I tell you, when I get complaints from family members of people inside the jail, it's not necessarily about having, I mean, and frankly, if it, perhaps we could provide some mattresses or something. I don't know, but like, if there's hard surfaces, it seems like seems like a quick fix to deal with that. Or, you know, some of these things actually could be addressed, but the complaints I get are about treatment from staff in the jail and not being provided care. Not to say that people love the conditions in the city county building or anything like that, but those are the complaints that I get from family members of people incarcerated. So just, we need to be mindful of how this jail is being used in a political way in certain conversations about health and safety, because there's a lot that goes into health and safety.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that it's horrible. I mean, if you have a medical emergency, that's probably the worst place you can be, because there's no place where you can lie down. There's no place where you can rest. And the alternative is going to the emergency room, which the staff are going to be extremely hesitant to do because of the cost. And so, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that needs to be fixed. The question is how, and we, again, because of some of the proposals we've gotten, we have not tried to get people out into the community for services, which could reduce our population by enough beds that we wouldn't need the city county building. So it's just, we could do that if we wanted to.
And again, just to kind of just add on, by being a person with a lived experience that who's been incarcerated, who's sat in Dane County Jail, as well as had to do and have done tours, it's the worst. It's bad in there, but then also the fact that when you have someone who has been injured, that adds a totally new, different element to it, because of the simple fact that you have infections and things of that nature that are also happening in the Dane County Jail. But something what I do want to say about a big difference between the old sheriff and the new sheriff is the fact is that, so we've invited the sheriff to one of our Man Up meetings, and so and he would call, it was all the men and women that were in the county jail were all just considered inmates. So we asked, and the conversation was, why do we consider them just inmates? They're people, right? So he changed the name from inmates to now they're calling them residents of Dane County Jail, which is a total difference. And so I think that in doing that, that's not to say that it changes anyone's sentence or time or anything of that nature, but or even making it a more welcoming place. But it does change the mindset of saying, like, look, hey, you're here for a moment, but this doesn't have to be your life. And so just those different things like that have to also be challenged, and being able to bring in more programming inside as well as being able to have programming outside that's going to support the men and women who are currently incarcerated.
Yeah, thank you. And we are pretty much at end, but I do want to give our panelists, if you want to share, there's so much, and we so, again, appreciate your time, sharing your expertise, and yeah, we really appreciate you being a part of the conversation tonight. But I want to give you each just a minute if you want to share, kind of reflections or call to action, whatever moves you at the moment. And Danny?
Yeah, I was just going to share, and thanks for the last minute, because I did want to mention something, and I know Tyson talked about it, and I think other folks have talked about just this movement, and that we do need to focus on the fact that things are changing and improving, and we need to hold hope. And I think that's a lot of like the work that I do and that Chrysalis does, and like in the community is holding hope for folks who have lost hope. And if you have that ability to keep going, and I want to reflect back just quickly on Marcia's question about abolitionists, and I would totally align with that. And I think part of being an abolitionist is holding hope that there can be something better, and there will be, and we have to just keep taking these steps and taking action, having the conversation, looping it back to what Anthony started with, like this is part of it, and the action is also part of it. So those are my closing comments.
Yeah, I think just continuing to challenge and push, especially the point that Heidi made about human service budgets. So continuing to get the truth out about what's really going on, and demanding that we invest in alternatives. And, it's great if you can get to these board meetings and speak out, but there are a lot of other places too, your friends and family, your peers, your coworkers, where you can be getting this word out that really does make a big difference.
And Anthony,
Yeah, I was trying not to, but yeah, so I echo to everything what they just said, but also I do want to make sure that I point out we need to get more people involved, even in these conversations here, right? So, not knowing how this information was shared about tonight, that has to change, because I love the fact that the people that are here, we have to get more Black and brown folks involved. It's just, because again, for some of you may have some type of experience, but then for a wide range of you may not. So let's change that. So, and I also, I'm challenged the people who are here, change that by also, post it out to your friends and so on and so forth to be able to get them involved. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Heidi, would you like to share?
Sure. I think we have the facts on our side. We have kind of the hope and the love, which is great. They've got like the $1 million consultants and stuff. so we really need a lot of hope and a lot of love and a lot of grassroots to overcome that, because it's a little intimidating, right? Like even when we have a resolution saying you need to factor this into your plan, they don't factor it into the plan. So but continuing to grow this movement, and I think knowing that there are more supervisors in this third group, I'm hoping to grow that actually believe we can change stuff, and we need to change stuff, and that we they want to work to it. Like it is not easy, but we need to just keep agitating and keep talking to folks. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here and all the good work that our panelists do every day. It was a really good conversation. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you all again. And yeah, thanks for folks for coming out, and we will share the recording and hopefully get this out more widely. And yeah, I guess I will echo, I think it's Marcia who said, yeah, sharing that information when it's ready to share about all the review of the previous recommendations sounds like it would be a pretty powerful addition to the conversation as well. So again, thank you all. Great conversation, a lot of substance, and yeah, thank you for all you do. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. And hey, Angela, I saw you join
Take
late.
care, y'all.
Hey, sorry, yeah. But I
All
look
good.
forward to the recording. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you. Have a blessed day or a blessed night.
Thanks, you too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Diane, is it like, if we're gonna like share follow-up stuff, should what's the best way to do that? Like post in the Facebook